It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the 17th Annual Conference of ASMEA. It's really a great pleasure to see so many old and new faces at the association. And this panel, this roundtable that we are having this afternoon is something that I started about 4 years ago. And it's really been my great privilege to have this roundtable. Most of you know that the two founders of the association were Professor Bernard Lewis and Professor Fouad Ajami. And for years we've done our best to maintain and honor the legacy of both of these great scholars. And part of doing so has been trying to create ways to do so within the association. Within this specific roundtable, which I started together, and we'll see on the screen Michelle, Fouad's wife, in conjunction with her advice and how to put this, and former students, former colleagues who knew Fouad, we've put all of this together. This afternoon, there's going to be we're really privileged to have a great roundtable all around with three great individuals who knew Fouad, who dealt a great deal with, grappled with a lot of the same issues that he did. And it's really a testament to the legacy, I think these days especially, as far as who Fouad was and why his voice is so much missed from the public discourse at large. One of my favorite books, is The Arab Predicament. And I think that one of the things that Fouad put forth that I'd like to cite this afternoon, has to do with really his observation at the time about looking at the region today, which I think is pertinent to the reality we're facing today. And I think you will appreciate his comments and his ability to think forward and what he would say if he were here today. So Fouad writes in The Arab Predicament, "The quoting of scripture can lend courage when courage is needed for difficult undertakings. It can connect people and societies to their origins and remind them of the path they have traveled. For, as we're long told by Edmund Burke, a society wrenched away from its past and its roots away from society without its future. Wholesale indictment of a political order and open warfare against a society's history may be polemically elegant, but they can turn into a nightmare. Not one generation could link with the other. Men would become a little better than the flies in the summer. But here can be found the warning, and I think this is really critical. Fidelity to the past and the connection it must be honestly felt. One cannot simultaneously bulldoze the past, as many wealthy oil states have done, and claim honesty to it." I think that, we all know Fouad's elegance and ability and his prose were phenomenal as far as dissecting the Middle East. There is a great deal to discuss as far as understanding the historical and cultural origins of where the Middle East is shaped today, especially as it relates to Lebanon, especially as it relates to the current war in Gaza and Israel's war with Iran at large on the seven-front war that we're dealing with. And I think that all three will have a lot to say about their insights, and in many ways, really honor Fouad's legacy by understanding what he was writing and talking about, analyzing at the time. So really, it's my great pleasure to welcome all of you again. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, who is going to say a few words about this larger panel, and then we'll turn it over to the panelists. Before I do that, I just also want to highlight one more thing, and that is that everybody in the room should be aware of, and something that we started as a new initiative. We are in the process here at ASMEA, given the role that Fouad had and the stamp that he left on the association and many of us in this room, we have inaugurated a prize in honor of Fouad, similar to the prize that we have put together in honor of Bernard Lewis, to honor scholars young and old from all over the world who have continued and continue his legacy. So that's a new initiative that we've been working on for the past 4 years. We are in the midst of getting individuals to support the project and, of course, donate to the projects. If anybody wants to hear more about that prize, please reach out to me throughout the conference. But I think that the prize itself is another way to honor Fouad and scholars who are continuing his way in a very difficult and challenging Middle East, understanding the courage that Fouad had and that many of his disciples and many of us who know them are talking about these very issues today. So on that note, I will turn it over to Michelle, and we will take it from there.
Thank you so much, Asaf. I want to thank Asaf and ASMEA in general for all the very, very important work that they've done in carrying on the legacy of Bernard Lewis and Fouad. I very much regret not being there this year. This was probably the most critical year in decades, I think, for the region. And I appreciate very much being able to connect to this panel and the audience. It's nice to see old faces. But there's a lot to be said. And I think you have in this panel incredible knowledge and insight and experience. And a great deal will be shared in terms of analyzing the region. But I think most of all, I want to say that ASMEA has done an amazing job of carrying on the legacy of Fouad in terms of the values and the hopes and the aspirations for the region, which all of these members of the panel and many of the members of ASMEA hold dear and have expressed in their own work. And as he said, the prize, I am very honored by this prize in Fouad's name. I think it will be very important in acknowledging and rewarding and encouraging the work of scholars, journalists, writers in general here and in the Middle East, where I think there are many more voices than we think there are. There are many voices out there that need to be heard, courageous voices, as are there those on the panel. And this award will, I think, will serve to not only honor Fouad, but to carry on the work that he and Bernard started with ASMEA. So I don't want to say too much because I don't have a lot to say, but these panelists have a lot to share. And I am very, very grateful for the presence of David and Mehdi and Franck, that they are here to speak with all of you and to give you their incredible insights and analysis. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Franck, who's going to be the moderator, and I am going to join the audience in listening. And I think this will be a very, very important discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Asaf. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm a frequent flyer on this roundtable. I don't know how much longer you're going to be able to tolerate me. I thought it would be appropriate, before giving the mic to my colleagues, it would be appropriate to preface this meeting and any conversation really on Fouad Ajami with a couple of quotes from two of his most cited Arab poets that throughout his work, at least in the Arab Predicament and the Dream Palace of the Arabs, he quotes on numerous occasions. The two I've chosen are Syrian by birth, Lebanese by choice, and by Lebanese vocation and avocation, they're both emigres. Adonis is the first one, who currently lives in Paris. He's a nonagenarian, 95, I think. And the other one is Nizar Qabbani, who also died in exile in 1998. Nizar Qabbani wrote, and this is reflecting, if you could think of what's happening today while reflecting on what Fouad wrote over 4 decades ago in the Arab predicament. Qabbani wrote, "Pity the nation that enters a war without a plan on how to exit this war." And he wrote this in the aftermath of the 1967 defeat, and he was the first Arab intellectual, Nizar Qabbani, he was the first Arab intellectual who actually called it a defeat. And he wrote a long-form poem titled Notes on the Margins of Defeat. And he writes, this is the summary, so pity the nation that enters a war without a plan, without an exit plan. Pity the nation. This is the summary of our defeat. We wage war armed with the Oriental's knack for oration and verbiage and empty bravado and saber rattling and hectoring. We enter war obsessed with our virility and our manliness, beholden to stale rituals and witchcraft and hollow word lists of abuse and debauchery and defamation that never killed a fly. Adonis, kind of the next Arab poet that Fouad quotes, he sums up what Qabbani writes about and says, essentially what we're doing is, what the Arabs are doing is that we're coming to a new world, an alien new world. We're facing it with these superannuated notions of chivalry and virility and honor, coming from a world that no longer obtains. And there comes a time, writes Ajami in the Arab predicament, there comes a time a decent human being ought to stop this sort of hectoring and rhetorical arm flexing and ought to practice a modicum of humility and introspection and self-criticism and ought to stop blaming others for homegrown failings and wrong choices. I'm not going to bore you with Edward Said, but even Edward Said, at the end of his life, he comes to the same realization that we should put an end to this record of failures and face history with new ideas. So what's going on with Hamas and Hezbollah today got me to again go back to old notes and old readings and old texts from Fouad. And one of the things he writes about, and again, you can read Hezbollah and Hamas into these fragments of text. Both, for all intents and purposes, have been decapitated. Their areas are devastated, and that yet defeat is not acknowledged. So Fouad describes 40 years ago what's going on now thusly. In their current conduct of the war and their justification of the defeat, the Arabs seemed saddled with ancient codes of chivalry, with nearly tribal ways of warfare. President Nasser of Egypt, this is in the aftermath of 1967, President Nasser of Egypt and the Jordanian Prime Minister provided an eloquent example of this detachment from reality. Nasser's statement was that Arab soldiers fight bravely and well in face-to-face combat with the enemy, and that defeat was attributable to the fact that they did not have a chance to encounter the enemy on an actual battlefield. The Jordanian Prime Minister does even a better job, would say that the Israelis know very well the bravery of the Jordanian soldier when the battle pits soldier against one another. But that in this instance, the confrontation was between soldiers and fire that descends upon them from the heavens. Is it possible, asks Adonis, for people to be facing a modern world with assumptions and rules of a world that, again, no longer exists? And I don't want to make light of this, but there has to be moments of levity in tragedies like this. And I kept thinking, I don't know if any of you know, the Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and the scene where King Arthur wants to cross this bridge, and the Black Knight says, "None shall pass," and he insists, "None shall pass," until they go into this sword fight, and King Richard amputates his limbs one after the next. And the Black Knight keeps insisting, "No, I will not accept defeat, and 'tis but a flesh wound," or "'tis but a scratch." And finally, he gives him the coup de grace, and he chops off his last leg. And the Black Knight is on the ground, bleeding from every possible source of blood you could find in his body. And King Richard calmly crosses the bridge. And here's the Black Knight calling out to him, "Where are you going, you little coward? Come back and fight." And King Arthur says, "What are you going to do? Bleed on me?" So that's, again, I'm not making light of what's going on, but this is something that Fouad wrote with great eloquence that I cannot mimic or imitate 40 years ago. So the Jews are likewise in this situation as King Arthur, going on with their lives, building a state rather than fighting and bleeding the way their adversaries want them to bleed. But, of course, the Jews are cowards. They fight with superior state-of-the-art power rather than meeting their adversary mano a mano on the battlefield with sword and shield. And with that, I'll leave it to my colleagues. Thank you.
Should I stand?
It's up to you. In my case, because I made it all the way there, I didn't want to come back.
Sin, it's a pleasure to be here with you. Thanks to Asaf and Michelle for inviting me to join the panel. It's a great honor to honor Fouad here at ASMEA. I've been thinking a lot about Fouad a lot lately, especially since September, when the Israelis finally turned their attention to the north and methodically started disassembling Iran's Lebanese militia proxy, Hezbollah. And more recently, I've been thinking of Fouad as the IDF, the Israeli army, entered the Lebanese border town of Khayyam in South Lebanon, where Fouad's mother was from. I met Fouad sometime in the aftermath of the Second Lebanon War. We shared a keen interest in the developments in the state of Lebanon and in trying to move Lebanon toward a more positive future. I was going to focus my remarks on the vanished Imam, one of Fouad's other masterpieces. I understand that Mehdi is going to be talking about that. So instead, I went back and took a look at some of Fouad's, I think, less prominent masterpieces. What he had to say about Hezbollah. He wrote a series of pieces, starting with the Lebanon War and going through the Syrian civil war that I think, that it turns out, were especially prescient, back in 2006, 2007, and 8, as well as later writings. In fact, when you look at those, much of what he wrote in these works, if you didn't know better, you might think that the pieces were being written now contemporaneously. So I'm going to talk about some of his views and what he wrote. So forgive me for quoting, but back in July 2006, amidst the Israel-Hezbollah war, he wrote a great piece in the Wall Street Journal. And this harkens back to, I think, what Franck just talked about. He said, Fouad wrote, there was something to Nasrallah's conduct that recalled the performance of Gamal Abdel Nasser in the Six-Day War of 1967. That leader, it should be recalled, closed the Straits of Tehran to Israeli shipping, asked for the evacuation of UN forces from the Sinai Peninsula, clear acts of war, but never expected the onset of war. He had only wanted the gains of war. He continues, it did not seem to matter to Nasrallah that the ground that would burn in Lebanon would be the main Shiite land in the south, nor was it of great concern to he who lives on the subsidies of the Iranian theocrats that the ordinary Lebanese would pay the price for his adventure. Well, Fouad was clearly attached to Lebanon. He wasn't particularly frustrated with Israel's approach to Hezbollah, which had a significant implications for Lebanon. He wrote, there was steel in Israel's determination to be done with Hezbollah's presence on the border. He says, think of this in the context today, he says, states can't and don't share borders with militias. 2006. Of course, what Fouad didn't know at the time of writing was that Israel wasn't prepared for that particular war. He published the piece about 10 days into that war, right about the time that Israel was running out of high-value Hezbollah targets in Lebanon. I'm sure Fouad would have been pleased to see this time that Hezbollah did its homework between 2006 and 2023. In those intervening years, Israel developed deep intelligence penetration and profound insight into the organization and its personnel. Fouad also had a keen understanding about what Hezbollah was and is. He wrote, the effective leader of Hezbollah isn't Nasrallah in his bunker, but Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, in Tehran. This was one of the great quotes, actually, that Mehdi told me years ago. He quoted from an Iranian newspaper, I believe. He said Nasrallah was, while he was alive. So Mehdi interviewed. It's his quote. When he say Nasrallah was asked about his relationship to Iran, and he said, "If Ali Khamenei asked me to divorce my wife, I would." Nasrallah, he continued, back in 2006, Fouad said, was just in the end, just the Lebanese face of Hezbollah. Those who knew the workings of the movement with intimacy believe that operational control is in the hands of Iranian agents, that Hezbollah is fully subservient to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Fouad was also the consummate interpreter for Western audiences of the sectarian Shiite milieu that in which Hezbollah operated in Lebanon. He talked about the Shiite community in great depth, and in his books, but also in these amazing articles. He said, though the Shiites had risen in Lebanon, there remains in them a great deal of brittleness, a sense of social inadequacy relative to the more privileged communities in the country. Fouad was, I believe, profoundly disturbed by Hezbollah's intervention in Syria. and the comportment of the organization there. Beyond the atrocities Hezbollah perpetrated, Fouad wrote about how during the vicious battle for Qusair, Hezbollah prevailed. He wrote, their triumphalism was abhorrent. They defied the sensibilities of Sunnis everywhere. They raised Shiite banners atop a Sunni mosque. He clearly loathed Nasrallah, who he described in one article as, quote unquote, the dreadful Shiite cleric. In 2013, during the Civil War, he wrote about Nasrallah's erstwhile regional popularity following the 2006 war with Israel. He said, he wrote, Syrians in particular were devotees of the man, but this is now in the past. Nasrallah and his movement are seen for what they are, satraps of Iran, Shia sectarians bent on the domination of Beirut, wedded to the tyranny of Damascus. Well, we all know from reading Fouad's books of his appreciation and a sort of nostalgia or non-nostalgia for Lebanon, warts and all. He was especially critical of the authoritarian isms of his youth in Lebanon, Nasserism, Baathism, Pan-Syrianism, and Arab nationalism. And you can add to that the sacrifice of Lebanon for Palestinianism. But Fouad very much wanted Lebanon to succeed, and he understood that Shiites, as the largest of Lebanon's 17 ethnic and religious sects or components, would determine the trajectory of Lebanon. He wrote at one point, the Shiites can make Lebanon or break it. He wrote, their deliverance lies in a recognition of the truths and limitations of the country, the holy war they can leave to others. There was a clear choice out there that Fouad, in his typical insightful and erudite fashion, articulated. Lebanon as a land of enlightenment and commerce, or the future offered by Syria and Tehran's theocrats. What he said was seeking a diplomatic reprieve for themselves by setting Lebanon on fire. What then was Fouad's policy recommendation? Well, here too, I think, if you don't know he wrote this in 2006, you might think it was written today. He wrote, the Lebanese are not masters of their own domain. They will need protection and political support. They will need to see the will and the designs of the radical axis contested by resolute American power and by an Arab constellation of states that can convince the Shiites of Lebanon that there is a place for them in the Arab scheme of things. Alas, some of you may have heard we're 2 days out from U.S. elections. I wonder what Fouad might have thought about our choices and the implications for the region and for Lebanon in particular. To be sure, little attention has been paid to Lebanon by the Biden-Harris administration. True, Donald Trump killed Soleimani. It was a great moment. And he pursued a maximum pressure campaign against the theocratic regime in Tehran. But the Trump administration, of which I was part, didn't do enough to push back on Iran's malign regional behavior and its support for proxies. We tried, particularly in Lebanon and Iraq, another state that increasingly resembles Lebanon, and not in a good way. There was a lot of interest in Lebanon at the State Department. Going forward, though, another Trump administration may be isolationist and undoubtedly less interested in the quote-unquote freedom agenda for Lebanon. But I must say, regrettably, there isn't going to be another George W. Bush administration regarding Lebanon. I served in that administration too, and we helped get Syria out of Lebanon. And post-2006, we tried to constrain Hezbollah via the failed Security Council Resolution 1701. I think Fouad would have been very frustrated with our choices. In 2012, in the early days of the Syrian civil war, he wrote as much. Frustrated with the Obama administration approach to the Syrian civil war, he wrote, quote unquote, George W. Bush, the protector of the Cedar Revolution, was gone, and so was Jacques Chirac, a close personal friend of the late Rafiq Hariri. Alas, There's much work to be done and insufficient interest in the West for getting that work done. It's times like this that that Fouad's voice is missed the most. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for having me here. Thanks to ASMEA and to Michel and to Asaf for inviting me. It's a great honor for me to be here to honor Fouad Ajami's memory. I remind Fouad with many virtues that he had and which made him an exceptional personality. He invited me to teach and co-teach with him in SAIS for, I think, 5 semesters. So I had the privilege of spending a couple of hours before or after the class with him every week. And we had dinners and lunches together, and he was so kind to let me to discover his inner world. And he told me lots of stories about his life and the life of the friends that we know and the great personalities in the region, and especially the life of the clerical life in Shia community. And I learned a lot from him. And but I want to emphasize on 3 characteristics of Fouad, which are so dear to me. One is his nobility. He was a noble man, and the nobility is a forgotten virtue, especially in these days. And he was, I find him that when he was talking about different people, so it was in private, we had private meeting, nobody was there. He was fair to other people, and he was talking to people who were unfair to him with a very clear and pure heart, and and with respect, even to those who had a very unfair criticism of him, and who actually did bad to him, did very unjust and unjustified attack on him for many years. The second, so it is very important because, as William James, the American philosopher, says in his lectures on pragmatism, for every philosopher, for every thinker, it is very important to manage his temperament. And we, as Middle Eastern, we are not good in having this economy of temperament very well. And Fouad was one of those rare persons that I've seen in my life that he was like a spiritual, enlightened personality. He worked on himself, and he was trying to manage his temperament, to see the reality as is, and have a better understanding of the human relations, which was, I come back to this point in a few minutes. The second virtue of Fouad was his literary knowledge and art. He was a true citizen of the Republic of Bel-Lettres, and he was a reader of world literature, Arabic literature, English literature, and even he has read some of the Persian novels and poets. So he was, literature for him was very important. He was in love with literature. So, and he was, his prose, as Asaf mentioned, was one of the greatest prose he was very stylish, and he was a very careful writer. And in our time, which is the digital era, which is the era of the decline of style, so we miss such personality who can write about politics, about the current affairs, which such a literary noble style. And the third characteristics of Fouad was his ability to understand the situation because I'm coming from a clerical family. I'm coming from a Shia family. It's not, especially the Shia world, the Middle East and clerical world are closed world, so you cannot enter into it very easily. So we have some people who call themselves experts who do not have intimate knowledge about the situation. They have some data. And on the other hand, we have some people like me who come from inside. They are insider, but they have some data. The data itself does not help. You have to be able to understand the data. And this needs to have some sort of the art of distance. I mean, you have to, for example, for talking about Iran, talking about Shia, talking about the clergy, for me, who has a very strong emotional ties to them, it's not easy. So to keep the distance and have a very educated mind, anthropological perspective to the situation. So it means that to be insider and outsider at the same time. So this was the art of interpretation that Fouad knew very well, to be insider and outsider, to be able to see things from inside and at the same time to keep the distance and to have objective methodological views and understanding of the situation. So when it comes to Musa Sadr, so Musa Sadr was born in the same city that I was born, in Qom. So they are, the clerical family. Qom was a very small city, so everyone knew everyone. So I knew Musa Sad's family and his relative. So it was very interesting for me to meet for the first time Fouad and talk to him about Musa Sadr. And what I discovered and what I learned from Fouad is that how to interpret the situation that you lived in. So it's two different things that, I have my memories, but these are not enough to understand the history. So Fouad was a true historian of present. So he was able to have a historical and political anthropological perspective at the situation and interpret what is going on, what is happening. So he had a very intimate knowledge of the clerical world and the difference between the clerical milieu in Shia clerical milieu in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Iran, in Bahrain, even in Saudi Arabia. He had traveled several times to Saudi. He had met some, Shia leaders. So he had a very comprehensive understanding, comprehensive views about these rivalries between clerics, especially between revolutionary clerics in Iran and Musa Sadr. He had lots of stories to say to tell that he didn't mention in his book. So it was very interesting for me because even now, I have not seen many people who have such a detailed objective and careful understanding of the clerical world. So, and he understood the importance of the religious authority or al-marja'iyya in Islam, in Shiism, and his views about Sistani and the rivalry between Sistani and Fadlallah in Lebanon and Khamenei in Iran was very, very important, and what happened after him proved that he was almost right in all his estimation and his speculations. Thank you very much, and I hope to be able to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions before opening it up to the audience. Maybe one question to both of you, if you both can weigh in on it. What happened to I know Fouad does not represent Lebanese Shiism. I want to be clear about that. I don't think he would like to be defined that way. But my question is, what happened to Lebanese Shiism? Because Hussein Abdul Hussein, both of you probably know him, famously said recently at another conference here in DC, said that it used to be that Lebanon's Shiites were the Maronites of Islam. And that got me into thinking, as you both were speaking, of this from Hussein, and the fact that he was right. I mean, not going back to, perhaps going back to Musa Sadr. What kind of influence did Musa Sadr have? Because Musa Sadr was actually, in the 1960s, he was a fixture in Maronite circles. He lectured profusely at the Cénacle Libanais, for instance, the Lebanese Forum, which was the meeting ground of all of the Lebanonists of the 1960s and 1970s. Michel Chiha, Charles Uram, all of these Phoenicianists. He spoke at least a couple of times, at least those are from some of the lectures that I have. Najib Jamaluddin was another Lebanese Shiite who was also in, he famously translated into spoken Lebanese Nahj al-Balagha of Imam Ali. He translated it into spoken Lebanese. And many more Shiites that tie into this idea of the Shiites having once been the meaning, the people in tune with the idea of Lebanon as the Maronites imagined it. So I'm wondering what happened. And if I may stick in a second question, to what extent, because you spoke about Fouad as we know him, the elegant stylist and deep thinker and lover of art and literature and world literature, and being balanced and reasoned and seasoned and measured. To what extent did the vanished Imam have an influence on him that way? Because the memory that I have of Musa Sadr was that he was a towering figure, first of all, as Fouad describes him in The Vanished Imam. He did not give him much interest in his youth, correct? But his stature, the fact that he was handsome. I remember my mother, for instance, was a very pious practicing Catholic, used to say, "This man is so sexy." For us, for a cleric, whether priest or he was to, and most of all that he spoke Lebanese with an accent and with a foreign non-Lebanese accent, and that was also part of his sexy aura, yes, if you will, because so.
Yeah. Regarding the first question, I have asked Fouad the same question once about the Shia, the fate of Shia in not only in Lebanon, in the Arab world, and he explained to me that in Arab nationalism, the Arab nationalism automatically exclude Shia. So Shia before 70s were secular. And as you, if you remember, the Marxism was very attractive to Shia milieu, especially in Iraq, in Najaf and Karbala, and in the house of the young people, that the children of clerics were attracted to communism, to Marxism, and we had in Lebanon we had Hussein Murawa, who was a great Shia Marxist, and and the Shia were identified themselves not as Shia but as Arab, secular Arab. So they were not Sunni Shia Arab, they were secular Arab, which means Shia Arab. So this was Ayatollah Khomeini who made the Arab Shia who fabricated this sectarian identity for Arab Shia after Imam Musa Sadr. So the demise of Musa Sadr was a very important turning point in the fabrication of the sectarian identity for Shia. Musa Sadr was not a typical Shia cleric at all, and that was his education, despite the fact that he was coming from a very, very respected clerical family, but he studied in Qom with the great Ayatollahs, but he went to the University of Tehran, and he was graduated in economy from the University of Tehran, and he did not believe that much in the Sharia, And many of my many of his friends told me that even clerics that when we were in his office, so he was receiving women with the miniskirts and things like that, which is totally unusual to see in the office of a cleric. Women like this, and he was sitting with Christians, and he was praying in a church, and he had a very women friend in Paris, and so he was not at all he was not looking for creating a sectarian religious identity for Shia in Lebanon, and he was working with the leaders of the world. Even he was cooperating with Shah. Shah was giving him financial aid and so on. So this was something that made him an enemy for revolutionary Islam or for revolutionary clerics. So many revolutionary clerics, including Beheshti and Muntaz and Rafsanjani and so on, they believe that he might be, because he's so popular in Shia world, and including in Iran, despite the fact that he was not living in Iran. He was very famous in Iran as Imam Musa Sadr. And when they called Khomeini Imam, it was following the Imam Musa Sadr. After the Imam Musa Sadr, they called him Imam. First, they called Musa Sadr Imam, and then they called Khomeini Imam. So they thought that he might be he might have a chance to succeed Khomeini. So that made him a target of lots of jealousy and conspiration, and there are some rumors that some clerics in Iran had a role in making him vanish in Libya. So so the kind of Shia that Musa Sadr was trying to protect or create in Lebanon was not sectarian at all, and he was thinking, he has lots of lectures about the peace, about the interfaith dialogue, about the necessity of the living together with Christians and even with infidels. So he had a very unorthodox fatwas on many issues, so which clerics even now in Iran do not accept it. One thing that I came to my attention recently was that the book of Fouad Ajami was not translated into Persian. This is very important, and I asked one of my friends who is a translator to translate it into Persian, and he started to translate this. And none of Fouad Ajami's books were translated into Persian, which is very sad. But the Musa Sadr especially, they don't like the kind of, because in Iran we have a foundation of Musa Sadr. The sister of Musa Sadr, Rabab, is very active, and they had several conferences in Iran. But the Iranians, Iranian regime or Iranian clerics, they don't like the picture of Musa Sadr as drawn by Fouad Ajami. So the Fouad Ajami's Musa Sadr is not legitimate in Iran. So that's very important. Yeah, thank you.
Well, they got mugged by Hezbollah. Ultimately, you removed this charismatic worldly, charismatic, independent figure, and it changed entirely, the trajectory of Lebanon after Iran basically established, built, nurtured, and cultivated Hezbollah in that country, planting the seeds. I don't know if this was Churchill who said the graveyards of the world are filled with indispensable men. This guy, the disappearance of Sadr changed the trajectory for the Shia in Lebanon. So much of what I know about, or my views, have been formed not only by Fouad, but by my friend, one of my best friends in Lebanon, Lokman Slim, who was murdered by Hezbollah back in 2021. Also Shiite, deeply immersed both in the secular and the religious traditions. And I think his view was basically the community was hijacked before Hezbollah. And remember, when Hezbollah started in their early documents, they basically said Lebanon will be an Shiite Islamic republic. Right? They made no beefs about this. They were very clear. Highly sectarian, no interest in intracommunal relations. Christians can convert, but this is going to be a Shiite country. Before the arrival of Hezbollah, the country was, the Shiites in the country had various marja'iyah, right? So some had Khoy. The people there had Fadlallah, right? The leading marja'iyah for Shiites in Lebanon, marja'iyah. But they also had Khoy, even after Khoy was murdered in Iraq. There are people who still identify him as their point of reference. But Hezbollah and Iran had a long game in Lebanon. You could not sidestep Fadlallah. They had a healthy respect for Fadlallah. They protected him for a number of years. But Fadlallah was not Hezbollah. He was not Vilayat Faqih, etc. But they had a long game. And so what they did was they said, okay, we're going to wait until Fadlallah is gone. And then we've got other people, whether it's Faf Dabulsi or these other sort of local, less prominent Shia clerics. But ultimately, we're looking for the point of reference to be Ayatollah Khamenei. They're going to point toward Tehran, not any longer toward Lebanon or Iraq. And this was their idea of state capture. But at the same time this was going on, and just one or two words on this, for those of us who do Lebanese politics, after the Cedar Revolution, when the Lebanese people stood up and booted out, ended the 20-year Syrian occupation of the country, 1.5 million Lebanese came to the streets, I would go see Saad Hariri and talk to him about what are you going to do now to bring together a coalition here that can actually support Lebanese sovereignty. Which Shiites are you engaging with? Right? And they always had a couple, many of which lived in the house of Hariri because it was too dangerous for them to be out. These people, the Okab Sakars and others who are, very nice guys, but didn't have this whole lot of credibility with the community. And basically, I want to say that Hezbollah's strategy worked. The Iranian strategy worked. And now, either because of intimidation, because of cultivated financial dependence, Hezbollah is the point of reference for the Shia community. And if you don't like them, your protest vote is Amal, which is an appendage of Hezbollah. Either way, you're looking toward Iran or Syria.